everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Good Old Podcast. I'm Jackie Franchuli for Wahoo's 24/7, and we have a special guest on this week's show. We have Streaking the Lawn, Zach Carey, who is a great follow, by the way, on Twitter. If you love everything UVA basketball, he's an up-and-coming reporter on the scene. Zach, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, Jackie.
And wasn't it exciting to see basketball again on the court, especially during a bye week when we needed something to keep us going? It was nice to have both the men and women out there, wasn't it?
It was really refreshing, especially with sort of the vibes around each of these programs and just all the new blood for each team. It was a lot of fun to sort of see those new guys and girls out on the court.
That's for sure. And if you're on YouTube, guys, you're going to see some practice footage. Obviously, the full practice footage is up there as well. Now, Zach, I think you can agree with me. The biggest thing that I saw was the scoring, the shooting of this team compared to last year. Last year, obviously, they were only 32.3% from beyond the arc. During that game, I know this is unofficial stats, but you and I had the same 15 of 32 for 46.8% shooting from three-point range. Yep. That is a big step forward for this program.
Yeah, that's meaningful. And I mean, and they got it from different sources too. I mean, you talk about 32 threes. Obviously it's two teams, so the stats are a little bit, it's wonky. But seeing just the depth of shooting from a number of different guys and sort of the way guys were actually able to hit catch and shoot threes, which was such a problem last year because they would, the guards would create space and would touch the paint, and then there would be nothing from that. They wouldn't generate anything offensively as a result. And so it was really refreshing just to see both teams' offenses be able to do that and be able to put the ball into the basket.
For sure. And you talked about the variety of guys. Isaac McNeely was 3 out of 7. Isaac Trout was 4 of 5. You got Ben Vanderblast, 3 of 4. You got Armaan Franklin. We're going to talk to about him a little more specifically later. He was 4 of 6. And Tane Murray, he was 1 of 4, but he's another guy we could talk about three-point shot during the season. So they have options they didn't have last season.
Exactly. And I mean, you talk about these guys, and you look at McNeely, really all of them, they all took tough shots. Like, these are not just easy threes. I mean, Franklin had, I think you played a minute ago, the step back three-pointer at the end of the shot clock where he was, at least 2 feet outside of the three-point arc. McNeely had a long one. I think Trout had a long with it that might have missed. But these guys are taking tough shots, and that bodes really well because they're able to force defenses to come out to them, to come out onto the perimeter and play. And you have these sort of complementary players around guys like Gardner, who are going to, create havoc on the inside, and Beekman and Clark, who I'm sure we'll also get to. But just having all these complementary pieces on the outside is going to do so much for this offense. No matter how they're played, no matter how they're incorporated into the lineups, it's just going to be a real relief for this offense, which it desperately needs after last season.
For sure. And, you mentioned Jaden Gardner, and we talked a little bit about Armaan Franklin. Those two transfers were stealing headlines last scrimmage about what they could bring. It seems like they took steps towards. Looking at Franklin, he, was 29.6% from three-point range last season after coming from Indiana, shooting over 40% from three-point range. I know he had some injury issues as well last season, but he wasn't smooth. He wasn't confident. That was different on Saturday. I know it's a scrimmage and you hype things up a little bit after a scrimmage, but he did look more confident in his shot, which he didn't do that last season. And then Jaden Gardner was confident inside, and that was a nice balance for them.
Absolutely. And I think the thing with Armaan is that often last year he wasn't comfortable catching and shooting. It was always he wanted to take a dribble to the side. He wanted to take a step back. And we saw sort of the comfort in the mid-range where he'd want to step into a 17-foot jumper rather than catching it in rhythm. And so I think that that's probably something that he specifically focused on. I mean, he worked with Justin Anderson down in Miami in the offseason. And if you think about sort of a UVA guard wing type who drastically improved his three-point shot at UVA, it's Justin Anderson. So I think that obviously he was streaky last year, and really the consistency was where he lacked. So taking, a huge conclusion away from obviously one scrimmage is maybe a tad ill-advised. So it comes down to, can you do this for 5 to 10
we're winning
games?
A national championship back.
But if he can do this over a stretch of games, and if he can consistently solidify his threat as a shooter on the outside in terms of just catch and shoot, basic spreading the floor, basic offensive basketball concepts, then all of a sudden you have new things that you can do with this team and sort of new sets that you can try and just play with.
And actually, Caden Shedrick highlight just popped up on the screen after he came up and cleaned up underneath the glass and got a nice bucket and a foul. I think he's going to be the main determination of how good this team is. I know it's hard to pin it on one player, but if he can be dominant like that and he can clean up those mistakes he did on the defensive side of the ball, like kind of get rid of those pesky foul troubles that he was having last season, I think that could bode well for UVA. And we saw some of that on Saturday.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's worth noting that Francisco Cafaro did not play in this scrimmage. So some of the sort of battle on the inside, Shedrick had an advantage. I mean, the biggest guy he was playing against was Isaac Trout in his first time in a real UVA. I mean, I guess in Italy as well. But with that being said, all signs point to exactly what you said, and Shedrick making that leap. And if you look at sort of UVA bigs in the Bennett era, at least maybe in the last 5 to 6 years, sort of that redshirt junior season is when a lot of guys take a big jump. I mean, you look at Mamadi Diakite, that was his 2019 when they won the national championship. That was his redshirt junior year. You look at Jay Huff the following season. That's often when things just sort of start to click for guys. Then obviously it's different, and just sort of like basing it off of sort of how long they're here isn't always, it's not going to carry over all the time. But I think that Shedrick, you're seeing those signs, and you're seeing sort of a guy who is more comfortable sort of just in his shoes. He's more comfortable in his body, and he looks bigger. I mean, that was one big thing that I sort of took away, is that he looked bigger and he looked more assertive, and just sort of like he got a mismatch on Ryan Dunn at one point. And Dunn is another guy who looks big, who I sort of thought of as this sort of like skinny 6'8" wing, but he looks solid. He's got some size that could play a small ball forward if he could get minutes. And Shedrick just clearly sort of like waved everybody off and just said, I'm taking him. And he did. And he scored a nice bucket in the post on a little sort of turnaround jumper and draw the foul and made the free throw. So he's absolutely a guy that could be an absolute game changer for this team on either end of the floor.
Now, before we go to break, I wanted to bring up probably the most controversial topic of Virginia basketball is Kihei Clark and Reese Beekman playing together. They played on two separate teams during the scrimmage. I liked what I saw from each of them. I really liked what I thought Kihei Clark, because he had more shooters on this team, could focus on being a floor general. I think that was something that I really liked about Kihei Clark. With Reese Beekman, I wish he was a little bit more aggressive on the offense, but I like the idea of him forcing those turnovers, have assists. Him and Kihei combined for over 20 assists in the game. So it's good things from both, but I honestly really liked what I saw about what Kihei can do when he had shooters lined up with them, like guys like Isaac McNeely, guys like Isaac Trout. I really liked having that ability for him.
Yeah, and I mean, I think at one point in the second half, there was lineup with Kihei, Isaac McNeely, Tane Murray, Ben Vanderplas, and Trout. I might have missed one guy in there, but absolutely. I mean, when he can play with guys like that, and it goes both ways with Beekman and Clark, and maybe plays into sort of the idea of it would be nice to not always have the two of them on the court at the same time, because neither one of them is particularly adept as a three-point shooter and has sort of their own issues there. I thought Kihei's handle looked really tight, and this is maybe just sort of an underrated sort of thing that might not come into play, but it just looked like he was comfortable in space. And obviously he's going to be smaller than people, so it's harder to strip the ball from him, but he looked comfortable, and maybe that's just from the extra space that shooters sort of create. But he looked really good. I agree with you on Reese. I think we had him with 4 points on 10 shots.
That's right.
He struggled finishing at the rim, which I thought was a little bit disappointing, especially considering sort of the athleticism that he does have and sort of the burst that he has. And so his jump shot doesn't look better, which is another thing that I think if you're looking for a big jump from Reese, you're looking at that jump shot. So it's one game to scrimmage, but I agree with you. Sort of Kihei looked really good as sort of that facilitator type. Reese, still very obviously amazing defensively. He's going to wreck games for some teams. But in terms of offensively looking for him to be that scorer, it wasn't quite there yet. And that can come with time and that can come against real opponents. But I didn't quite see those signs, I think, just as you didn't either.
Yeah, and when we get back from the break, we're going to actually talk about how this rotation might look like, especially with these freshmen. Which are the freshmen do we think is going to make it into the rotation? Find out after the break. And welcome back to the Good Old Podcast. I'm Jack Frenchuli for Wahoo's 24/7. That's Zach Carey from Striking the Lawn. Does a good job over there covering both football and basketball. So make sure you follow him on Twitter and also follow what they do over at Striking the Lawn too. Zach, we left off talking about Reese and Kihei, two veterans on the team, but I think a lot of people are interested in one of the best recruiting classes Tony Bennett has had in Charlottesville since he's been here. This is a very talented group, and seeing them in person, you can understand the hype and the buzz
Yeah.
around this. Both Isaac squared, I think both of them had some good shot selection, and they both were confident in that shot and pretty smooth. I really like what Isaac tried. Obviously, you look at defensively for Isaac, you can see why he was struggling against going against Shedrick, but I thought the confidence with him was great. And then Ryan
Yeah.
Dunn and Leon Bond, I thought they both had the athleticism that you think these guys are going to turn out to be great for UVA down the line.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think the thing with Trout is that he gives you, similar to Ben Vanderplas, he gives you an element in the front court that the team didn't have last season as a guy who can pick and pop, who can play on the perimeter in a small ball lineup. And it can sort of give you something different. And lineup versatility is a big thing that this team is going to be able to benefit from that they didn't have last season, and that they can force teams to adapt to them a little bit more. And Trout could absolutely be a piece of that. I agree with you on McNeely. I think that he is probably the most physically ready and sort of just basketball ready in terms of just the finite details. He's not going to turn the ball over much. He's not going to make decisions that are going to sort of detriment the team too often. But then Dunn and Bond, they looked farther along than I had expected. And I think that a lot of people talk about it, and I don't have inside information about this whatsoever, but about those two guys redshirting, probably being on the outside looking in to the rotation as sort of the 11th and 12th guys, and maybe a 10-man rotation, even if that is kind of deep for Tony Bennett. But they looked very physically ready, as you said. Dunn looked bigger, and I think that each of them and sort of what their potential is as players transcends what this team has on its roster. Trout and McNeely provide something that the team didn't have last season with shooting, with spacing, and just something that's going to fit in well. And they're each smoother as products, as players on the court right now than Bond and Dunn are. But Bond and Dunn each give you something that nobody else on this roster does. And that could be something that really can raise the ceiling for a team in a year or two, maybe right now, if they can really earn those minutes. I'm not sure if they will. Bond looked really good as a passer, which I wasn't expecting. He looked good on the wing, handling the ball, made a couple of errant decisions, lofted a couple passes that went out of bounds. And so there's still room for improvement there. Obviously looked very fluent defensively and just very he could flow with the movements of the pack line defense, which is something that is hard to do for a freshman. Dunn looked like he could be a small ball forward DeAndre Hunter type. And I think for Dunn, it's going to be a matter of when does it click, not if, when, because it's going to click at some point for him. And then you're just going to see this burst because he's got offensive potential. He doesn't quite have the 3-point shot, similar to how Hunter didn't have it in his true freshman season. But he's smooth everywhere else, potentially just a little bit more skilled, especially around the basket than Hunter was. And he can run in transition well. He's got some decent handles. And I think defensively, he's going to be a really good product and sort of he's a good prospect now and can turn into something that is really, I mean, we see him guarding Bond here. And that's exactly what I was talking about with Bond sort of making feeds on the inside that usually you really only see from point guards. But both of those guys have long-term potential that might not quite live up. They might not live up to that this season, whereas McNeely and Trout are going to give you something right away. But yeah, every one of these guys could be a really, really good player for UVA down the line.
For sure. And I remember like a block or two that Dunn had that made me like, okay, all right. Yeah. He is more athletic and more physical than I thought he was going to be at this point.
Right.
So yeah, that's going to be some questions for Tony Bennett. You kind of hinted at it a little bit because usually when you think of Tony Bennett, you think of a small rotation. He's not really into going to deep in the bench like that. I think you can see him this season going to maybe 9 or 10 is the talent that he has.
He's got the depth and you've got the options. I mean, I think in my head, it's sort of there's a top 6 with the returning starters from last year being Kihei, Reese, Armon, Jaden, Caden. Obviously, Caden Shedrick and Cafaro swapped out of those starting spots. So you have those 5, including Caden and not Cafaro, and then Ben Vanderplas probably as your 6th man, or at least the guy who's going to get the 6 most minutes early on. And then you sort of look at Murray, Cafaro, McNeely, and Trout as sort of those 10 guys, Dunn and Bond question marks.
Yeah.
And so it's a tough sort of, it's hard because Bennett likes to stick with his guys, and that's
Mhm.
something that you see, especially in postseason play late in the season. I mean, in the 2019 run, there were times when he would only play 6 guys in a game, and he would just ride his players. But you saw some of the flaws of that last season. You saw Armaan Franklin start 0 for 3 and then finish 1 for 7. And I think that something that this team will have from the 3-point line or elsewhere, you can plug in somebody when somebody's struggling. Like you have the opportunity to do that, along with sort of that lineup versatility, being able to play a stretch 4 and a stretch 5 rather than sort of more sort of old school basketball 4 and 5 like Gardner and Shedrick. And so the opportunities are really endless for this team, and that's really exciting if these pieces can come together.
No, for sure. This is definitely gonna be an exciting team to watch. I think this is
Yeah.
gonna be it's the hype is here already for Virginia basketball. I don't know if it's because people are craving that hype,
Yeah.
but it's definitely you can definitely feel it in Jan Paul Jones Arena too with the fans too. They're really excited to see this team in action. And you know who else was really excited to be out there? Coach Mox. Coach
Yeah.
Mox was back. She's the new Virginia women's basketball coach. And Zach, it's night and day how that program has switched under Coach Mox. Obviously, she's a new head coach. She's brought some new energy. And we both were there also for the women's scrimmage. And, you know, the first thing she did was she took the microphone, introduced herself, introduced the coaching staff, and she asked the community to, be part of this program. And I think this community, especially joining in Sam Burnell, the transfer from Notre Dame, whose family live in Ruckersville, Virginia, you can hear that people are waiting for this program to just start something.
Yeah. And I think that you felt it in JPJ. And I didn't pay too close attention to the women's program under the previous staff, but typically it was just sort of a feeling of just, I mean, doom and gloom a little bit. Whereas now it just, everyone's excited, and as they should be. This roster has players that individually I think were always talented and sort of like had potential. You look at somebody like Taylor Valladay. Obviously, you bring in Brunel and a number of other players similar to that. But now it seems like they're finally starting to come together as a team a little bit more, and that there's a little bit more of an energy, and that there's a little bit more cohesion and just sort of common purpose. Whereas before, it just seemed like it was lost on everyone. And that's really encouraging, and I think that it was cool to see Coach Mox introduce her whole staff and just this sort of like youthful program that
Mhm.
seems like it's ready to sort of break out onto the national stage, and they've got the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, it's hard to evaluate a new coach because she hasn't played a game yet. She hasn't coached
Right.
the game in Virginia colors. But seeing what Coach Mox has done as a new head coach, she just gets it in a
Yeah.
way where you see her social media presence, you see how she's handled the recruiting front. My goodness, the first thing she did was to recruit Sam Burnell to come back, which
Yeah.
means she's already got the Ruckersville, that Greene County area, all up trying to come to John Paul Jones Arena.
Right.
And then she went out and said she got one of the best players in Louisa County and in the country by having Olivia McGee commit. And she wasn't done. She got Kamora Johnson from Stab from the city of Charlottesville, Albemarle County, to also commit in the next class. So you have two amazing players from a top 100, top 50 on ESPN committed to
Yeah.
her program. So next year, she's going to have Sam Burnell, Kamora Johnson, and Olivia McGee. So she's not only getting good players, she's getting the community involved.
Yeah. And that's really important. And that all just comes down to sort of a commitment to, I mean, we talk about it in football and it's a completely different thing, but a commitment to getting these kids, from local areas to get excited, about this program. And I mean, you just talk about, and could potentially create a pipeline. I mean, you talk about Sabre now, you talk about people who are going to watch Olivia McGee play at their high schools and in their local areas and then go to UVA and play in JPJ. And that's going to create, I mean, that's just going to create so much excitement, and it already has. And you talk about Kamora Johnson. I mean, Charlottesville is buzzing. I mean, there's plenty of people from Charlottesville at UVA. And as a student, I mean, you can already tell that that's happening. And it's just, it's something that is, I mean, yeah, I've said the word 5 times, but it's just exciting, and it just seems like things. It seems like things can only go well once the games start to play to sort of happen, and once they get on the court. And obviously, it's going to take more time
Yes.
to get the results on the floor than perhaps on the recruiting trail, which is an odd sort of concept because that doesn't typically. Usually, you're looking for the on-court results, and then you get the recruits. But yeah, it seems like something is brewing here.
Yeah, I think she said she wants butts in the seats, and recruiting
Yeah,
3, great players from the area is certainly gonna intrigue local people to come and watch. I know
right.
that Sam Brunel's gonna have a huge group of people.
Yeah,
I remember her playing with Notre Dame at the JPJ and the amount of people there to watch her. I can't imagine what's gonna happen with her playing for the hometown school now. So that's certainly a big thing. And I wanna stress with something. I think the Virginia women's program has gotten a lot of, you know, I guess, news or hype around it from media members, but also just about the community too. And it is a process. And that's something that Coach Mox has really done a good job of trying to stress that that progress is in the process. I think that's what she was saying. And
hmm
that's what she's trying to focus on. She's trying to make progress with this program. This program last year wasn't good. And she
yeah,
said, she's from the state of Virginia. She understands the traditions at UVA. And one thing
right.
that she said was she didn't pay attention the last few years, but she saw the wins and loss program and she was pleasantly surprised at the talent level that this program had. So she's happy with it, but it's going to take time. It's
Yeah,
a program that, let's not put the car before the horse before the cart here and just say like, hey, they're gonna win big games here. They're gonna be
yeah,
great. This is
right.
gonna be a steady progress. But it's exciting times for the women's program.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that they're starting to pop up in sort of bubble predictions for the NCAA tournament. Um, but that's also I think that is a reasonable sort of expectation. Is that if they could
Yeah.
find a way to get in the tournament first year under Coach Mox, I mean, that'd
Oh
be amazing.
gosh.
But
That would be
it's steps like that. We're not talking ACC champ, and maybe we are, and then all of a sudden I'm but you know. But sort of yeah, right. You have to take those steps to get where you're trying to go. Fortunately, Sam Brunel is going to be around for 2 years. I don't know if that was confirmed beforehand. You would probably know more than I
yes,
would.
it's she's gonna
But
be 2 for 2 years.
I mean, yeah, I mean, her saying that yesterday, it's incredible, and sort of just the players that this coaching staff is already bringing in are really exciting, and that's just something that this program hasn't had in a long time. And I think that I saw UVA, like the official UVA Instagram account, I believe, did a little sort of walking around grounds, interviewing students thing before the blue-white scrimmage, and a lot of the questions were about the men's team, but there was when people were asked about the women's team, there was a acknowledgement of Coach Mox and of sort of the energy. And personally, considering the energy around the UVA football team right now, like
Mhm.
it's pretty. It takes something for students to be aware of a program, especially even a women's program. Unfortunately, so it's something that it's taught. I mean, it spreads, and it's really great to see. And I think that Coach Mox has done the right things in the time that she's had and the opportunities that she's had so far. And then, as you said, it all comes down to sort of the progress of the process.
That's right. And basketball season is less than 30 days away. We're almost there, Zach. We've almost made it to the starting
Absolutely.
point of basketball season. Well, Zach, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast this week.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
So thanks again to Zach for joining us on the show. It was nice to talk some Virginia hoops after watching both the women and the men scrimmage on Saturday. And we had full coverage of that scrimmage on Wahoo's 24/7, including the 8-minute video clip of the highlights from Virginia men's and that 3-minute clip for Virginia women's, all on our site at Wahoo's 24/7, including our takeaways as well on Wahoo's 24/7. And if you like what you're hearing on the show, go ahead and subscribe to wherever you listen to your podcast. And also go ahead and click on this video on YouTube and subscribe and click on the bell so that you're notified whenever there are new videos here on YouTube. For the rest of the week, this is going to be a short week for Virginia football. Tony Elliott will speak to the media on Monday. The coordinators will speak on Tuesday. The team will travel to Atlanta on Wednesday and then obviously face Georgia Tech on Thursday. We will have an episode on Wednesday, just like we do on normal weeks. And that one will have the 20 Elliott takeaways, but also it will have a game preview for the Georgia Tech game. And then we will also have a game recap later on this week about what stood out about the game against the Yellow Jackets. We will not have that on Monday. We'll actually have it sooner. It'll probably be either Friday or Saturday this week. I hope you guys have a good week. So for Zach Carey, I'm Jackie Franchuli. I'll see you guys soon.